and we are recording. So how many matches do we have left? We have 10 matches left. Right.
Yeah.
We only need 9 wins. Do we think we get it?
I mean, we can also go 10 for 10. Like, why aim low, Q?
Because like it's fitting that the new season of Ted Lasso is out, because honestly, it's
That's
the
true.
hope that's gonna kill me. Like, we are approaching April, top of the division, top of the league, and I couldn't tell you the last time that we had like this much of an opportunity to get it done this late in the season. I love watching this team. It reminds me of sort of the last time I remember this team being like just this fun to watch was when Henry was on the team. Like, that's how long ago. I genuinely, like, say what you want about the Fabregas RVP teams, but this team has honestly, win or lose at this point, this is up there as one of my all-time favorite Arsenal teams. Like, Martinelli, that's my dude. Gabby, oh, I love Gabby Martinelli.
They're also fun to see in life. So, like, obviously, I do live in
Rub it
London.
in.
Well, it's like a 10-hour flight for you. And it's really different now, because I used to see a lot of matches at the Emirates where, like, it wasn't super electrifying, but, if they were 2-0 down and they would come back, and you would feel sort of like, oh, shit, a win is possible in the books, or is possible today. And this season, the few matches I've been going, it's just like, okay, lads, we're down 1-0, 2-0, or whatever. Like, we can stir it around. A draw is absolute minimum. You sort of have that higher level, which is quite crazy, because I think if you look at our roster, it's not like we have bad players, but we don't have a Haaland in there. Let's be honest. Like, we don't have that guy or whatever, but we don't need it apparently, because we can keep up with him.
No, and honestly, like I'll own it. Right before the Leicester City match, so they'd already started the season a little bit. The very first one, like way back in August, and I was at my buddy's house in Nashville, who's also an Arsenal fan, and we woke up early to watch the match. And I kind of said, I was like, look, I want, my goals for the season were qualify for UEFA and win the Europa League. And I kind of even said, I was like, I think we've got a better shot of qualifying for UEFA, like the Champions League next year, by winning Europa than I think we do by getting top 4 in the league. Candidly, like, that was where my head was at in August. And I think the thing that this team has done excellent, that Leicester did very well the year that they won, was they won all of the matches that they had to win. There were, sure, we lost that Everton match. We had that draw against, I think, Southampton. But beyond that, it was every match you expected to win, they won. And then they went places and won too. And that's what was like beating Chelsea, beating Tottenham. Like, it is, you have one more match against Man City, and that if we win that match, we win the league. Like, it's scary to say something like that. But I digress, my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Late Night Bitcoin. I'm joined by my good friend Joël Kai Lenz, all the way out in London. We are recording this at a reasonable hour, so forgive us.
Thank you.
This is not one of the live episodes, but this is an episode with a European friend, and this week we have a couple of these type of episodes. So hang in there, guys. I hope you appreciate and enjoy these. Joel, thank you so much for making the time. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me, Q, and for making or being able that I can record it. Because I would have gotten up at an early hour, but like I wouldn't be sure if my flatmates would be enjoyed about the whole thing. So having the lunatic in the living room shouting about Arsenal at like 2 a.m. It's definitely not enjoyable.
No, we don't need to do that. Let's start the episode the way I like to start every single episode. Joël Kai, what was the very first time you ever heard about Bitcoin, and what was your initial reaction?
I think I heard it for the first time in December 2012. Just because a friend of mine sent me like a message saying like, hey, have you seen this internet thing? he was big into like World of Warcraft. So there used to be the idea of like, magic internet money. And I looked at it, and like for 5 minutes, I was like, oh, okay, it's got this weird concept behind it. I understood enough technical stuff to like get what's going on. But I was like, yeah, I'll just put it into my like pocket, like a read later saving service or whatever it's called, and just flat out ignored it. But the first thought was immediately like, yeah, it's just another one of those internet currency figs that sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't.
So I want to get in a little bit on just like that idea of like what is this, like this crazy internet money, like it's part of the journey I've just come to accept. There's a rare breed of Bitcoiners that are like, they hear about it and they're like, oh yeah, and I'll be honest, like a lot of them, they're gamblers. Like that's a big trait I tend to notice in the people who are like, yeah, I got Bitcoin right away, or they are like very ingrained in the commodities market, not the stock market, but commodities markets. Those type of people, it clicks much easier. But then for most of us plebs, like we hear about it and we don't necessarily see it. And in the conversation I was having I'm recording this the day after I had the conversation with Eastside Tony. And one of the things that I talked with him about was, Bitcoiners tend to, I think, or at least people when they first hear about Bitcoin, there's like that heavy dose of skepticism, due in large part because like all we've ever known in our lifetime, and I'll dunk on the country you live on now, like, dude, your lifetime, my lifetime, it's been the dollar. Maybe like way back in our grandparents' lifetime, it was the British pound. But for the most part now, you talk to people around the world and they've only ever known the US dollar to be the most powerful currency in the world. But that's not always been the case. Now, it's too early in the morning for me to have these high conversations, but like we can go down the rabbit hole of, right, but we live in a simulation that I genuinely am starting to believe like it only started in the like late 1900 or mid to early 1900s. So literally we've only ever known the dollar because that's what this simulation was designed to feed us, and it gave us history. But conversation after I roll up some joints and smoke them. Let's talk a little bit though about this just concept of like all we've ever known is the dollar, and how hard it is to break that reality to this new reality of, oh, money, just like everything in life, has always changed, especially the quote unquote global reserve currency, which is also a new phenomenon from like this generation.
I mean, what's crazy for me is whenever you turn any media on, is whether that be like, I don't know, Bloomberg, CNBC, they are obviously very much Americanized. So I think most of these media companies are based out of the US and sort of have their international holdings, but like everything is priced into the dollar. So even if you try and escape the dollar standard, you're sort of sitting there going, okay, and how do I do this? Like every pricing page is in the dollar, everything is being converted back into dollar. I'm just thinking of a real world example, like even if you go to the city of London, there is often, obviously, we do live on like the pound for whatever it's worth. But you do see like a lot of cab drivers who price their rides in like dollars. And then you see sort of with today's conversion rate, because they have that many international people coming in and out who are used to it. What I find fascinating though is if you go a step further and you ask someone like, do you know that the dollar is a world reserve currency? Most people go like, no, but like, it's the biggest one, right? And then if you go even further than that and ask him, well, like, how do you think the dollar works? Like, is there some secret department handing out dollars? Is there a printer? Is there a fun computer doing stuff? They just sit there and go like, oh, I don't know, in my Revolut account or my digital bank account, I could just flip my local currency to the dollar, and it works. So it's crazy to think about these aspects, and even other things like subscriptions. Everything gets priced into dollars. it gets converted automatically. So yeah, definitely not something you think about early in the morning, late at night, I think.
No, and it's like there are a lot of reasons why, I definitely think a part of it is just that level of education is not something that we strive for, both in this country and in your country. Like, it's not like you're say what you want, but like we're focused more on learning things like the periodic table of elements, memorizing that rather than understanding how to do our taxes. But like I can do long division, which it is a skill that everyone needs to know. Like in my opinion, like there's a level of basic knowledge that everyone should have. But I understood long division in the 4th grade. Like, sure, you could be mathematically challenged and I'll give you until 8th grade, but like high school, the fact that we don't, like, I got to fill out my freaking taxes in this country still. Like, I'm floored that, and we can get into the reasons of, Intuit paying enough lobbyists to keep this whole like tax system so challenging so that people have to go and pay for these tax services. I get it. But there's a degree where I think we've done a disservice, and whether it's intentional or not, like I'll leave that for a different part of the conversation. How much onus do you put though on families and parents to try? I'm not saying the parents need to understand and know like the lies of fiat, but walking your kids through like how you're supposed to manage your bills, manage your personal finances, like pay your taxes. Like how much onus is it on them?
Firstly, a huge responsibility. I think I was always very lucky because my both of my parents, so my mom used to be a banker, funnily enough. She then went into consulting and all of these fun things. And my dad used to work in construction, interior design all the time. So they sort of had that, cash flow management upbringing. So I was brought up with like the rule of thirds. If you want to buy something for $100, you got to have at least $300 in savings, all of these things. But I also seen the negative side of it also. I think it's important to teach your kids, what is cash flow? What is illiquid, liquid, all of these things. How does the economy work at the end of the day? That's a big topic, but you can teach kids that in a very simple manner. But it's also good to experience the negative side. I've seen this with my granddad. He used to be self-employed all his time. And, basically working till he was 75, 78, something like this. And never really getting like why he's losing money because he never adjusted his prices for like 25 years. And so when I came out of like high school, I told him like, dude, there's this thing called inflation. You should maybe look it up. If you stick with the same price for 25 years, it's going no places. So I think family has a huge role to play there. I would just argue like teach your kids both the good and the ugly, because they learn more in the ugly side. Like to this day, I still have principles in the back of my head which were mistakes my granddad did, because I've learned a lot of stuff. Oddly enough, there, Q, like you asked me about the dollar presents. My grandparents still believe that like $1 is worth. I mean, they don't believe, but like they have this perception that they need to pay 4 Swiss francs for $1 because apparently that was for a very short, brief time in history, somehow a conversion rate. I was like, hang on. I mean, the dollar to Swiss franc was always very strong. I knew like the pounds to franc was a bit different, but they still have this perception like the dollar is so strong because at one time in our life we paid that much of a conversion rate, or we had such a huge difference in like presence. That they stuck with it.
I want to pause for a second. So, smooth brain, not smart person. I want to walk through this for a second. Your grandparents at one point in their lives would have to give 4 Swiss francs to get $1 back. I'm following that part correct?
Yeah, but to be fair, it was like a week maybe at one point in history. But like there was that time, yeah.
But today, right now, like I wanted to make sure I had this right. $1 US, instead of getting you 4 francs, which is what your grandparents remember for that 1 week of their life, that is just its stock, only gets you 92 cents.
Mhm.
Like, technically speaking, the Swiss franc is actually stronger than the US dollar.
Mhm.
Like, just again, and I'm not trying to knock on your grandparents because I think that's a very common
Mhm.
thought process. It's the norm. And I challenge people who might maybe disagree with that or who think otherwise that go have a conversation, not even just with your family, like go have a conversation with a normie stranger. Go ask your
Mhm.
Starbucks barista what they think about, like if you're in America, ask someone that you know who is not a Bitcoiner what they think about something like Silicon Valley Bank. Go
Mhm.
ask someone if you're in Europe about Credit Suisse. Like these are things that for us it's like the doomsday end of the world, but for the everyday person, like it's not on the forefront of their mind.
Funny enough that you mention it, like we can get into Credit Suisse a bit later, but I remember when all of these banks are going down, like my grandparents, friends from Switzerland call me because I've been sort of calling out Credit Suisse since 2018 for other various reasons. I can explain that later. But I was still going there, I was sort of Bitcoin in me was like, okay, you're getting there. You're asking the right questions. Like, well, didn't they protect like depositors? Like, isn't the money I put into the bank 100% Q safe and stored there and technically over collateralized? I was like, no, dude, they don't even have to collateralize anything at this point. Like, can they go full on fractional reserve banking, take the $100, lend it out completely, probably over leveraged by 1000x, probably not 1000, but more than 10 enough for surely, and sort of play that game, right? But you still you always run into the same wall, like, oh, okay, but at the end of the day, like we have systems in place and like they can't do what they want. I was like, if that were the case, none of the fuckers would have survived '08, because they should have all stopped work there, been thrown in jail, in my opinion. Everyone can have this different opinion there, of course, but that was sort of the point. We should have stopped and brought in something different, which someone in this world or a group in this world did. They at least thought about it, and now we have this option. But yeah, completely. If I talk to the people who hand me out coffee in the morning, if I go and grab one for breakfast, and I ask them like, "Do you think we're in a recession?" The initial answer I get is either it says no in like the local newspaper, or on the local website, or yes, we've been in it for like a couple of months now. I can really feel it, but I can't explain to you why. Which is, I think that's the crazy part. Like how fucked up is the system that these people can't see through something very simple, I think. Because if you actually get it once, I think it's not too complicated. But apparently, it's a hard way to get into that thought process.
I wonder, just like, I wish. Nope. Who are you? Who's calling me? No, don't do that. I wonder what the conversations were like post World War II, or honestly, maybe post World War One, when the pound was really weakening, and there
Mm-hmm.
was that moment where the shift happened. Because we've only read about it. Um, I don't have family that lived in Western parts of the world. Even at that point in time, all of my family was in Iran. Like, they were dealing with sort of recouping and fixing the country post World War II, because both the British and the Russians were using that country for their own personal gains and needs, and sort of destroyed it. But Iran was very
Mm-hmm.
much on its own. So I wish I could better understand, because you would have to talk to someone who is at least 100, if not
Mm-hmm.
110 years old, because you can't just have been born. You can't be a kid during that transition,
Mm-hmm.
because you're not comprehending that. Like, you're just not. If you're 10 years old and that shift happened, like, for all you know, that's just what it was like. Um, but we are bearing witness to that, a similar shift happening in a in a much different way, of course. But I want to press and ask on this. So, as I kind of alluded to, post World War II, we had Bretton Woods meetings, and that inevitably led to the governments themselves deciding that the U.S. dollar is what it will be backed by gold, and everyone else will back their fiat currencies on the dollar. Today, right now, you have all over the world, countries are reaching agreements amongst themselves on how they want to settle trade. And that is the most important, genuinely, it is the most important sort of role that the US dollar has in the world, is the settlement of global trade today, right now, specifically the petrodollar. But you're seeing trade for any resources really start to get changed to the local currencies. I'm going to just keep using Iran as the best example. Most recently, we see Iran and Saudi Arabia reach a deal through China. I'm going to give you a hint. They're not agreeing to use the dollar.
Of course not.
Like Russia and Iran coming to terms that they're going to create their own mutual currency to settle their trades amongst one another. I'm going to give you another hint. Right now, it's not Bitcoin, and it sure as hell ain't the dollar. It is fascinating to me. And like, China made countless deals with other Middle Eastern countries to settle their trade and their local currency. Russia has been doing the same. Like, whether we want to act as though these things have no merit or not, I think that's a bit naive and arrogant, if I could just be blunt about it. So, in my opinion, we're watching Bretton Woods happen. Bretton Woods 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Like, it's happening, but not in a large meeting room with every country. It's individual countries.
Have you ever seen that drawing? I think it's now probably older than like 100 years, where you sort of see, I think it's the US as like a fat Edgar Hoover, or whoever it was, and I think it was Europe or maybe France, Germany, sort of displayed like figures and standing around in like huge postures, like giants compared to how small the other ones were China, Russia, and I think Africa. And it sort of said on the headlines, Europe and America's destroying itself from within, and we're the dumb big ones. I'm just quoting, guys. I'm not like saying anything to anyone here. We're ready to take over because that's how it's always been. And I sort of saw this thing a couple of days ago on Twitter. I was like, holy shit, like if they've seen this 100 years coming in, it kind of gets your brain thinking to like, okay, to what you started earlier, that illusion we're living in. Like, how far has the dollar been, I wouldn't say placed, but like put in place as something where like, okay, yep, we're going on this thing for 100 years. And if it breaks, like it always does in the way they do it with every reserve currency, Russia, Africa, and China especially is there to step up. I think if you look back at history, there are a lot of these clues to leading up to the thing we're coming in now, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I definitely, it's like they want us to find out and they're like mocking us by doing it. There's like a little bit of that where you're like, you are, what? Like, really? You're just going to like jokingly say these things? Like, I'm curious what your thoughts or feelings are though on just, to go back to sort of the situation that I'd presented, these different countries that are starting to make deals where they will sort of finalize their international trade with other trade partners in other currencies. What short and long-term effects that may have just on the world economy and just money in general. I don't want to necessarily focus on the dollar. I love having like someone like you who's just lives in Europe who doesn't use the dollar on a daily basis, because I think there's such a level of privilege and a lack of understanding of what the rest of the world wants and needs when Americans just talk about the dollar amongst themselves.
Yeah, so first of all, I think there's definitely going to be a clash of giants. You know, if let's just say Saudi Arabia, that part of the world does these trade deals. I think for surely one with Russia, for surely one with China. China and Russia is now already in talks, and you sort of get that triangle there. The next logical step for them is Europe, and Europe is a huge safe haven for like the US because it's a big trade partner with all of the different countries, Germany, the UK, etc. So I think there'll definitely be some clash. I don't know if it goes down like the historical context, you know, Cold War and all of these things, but I could potentially see something of that sort happening. I think we're in the early phases of that already. But for people in Europe, it's actually ironic because a lot of people, I would say, look towards America for like, how should we proceed our economy? Like, what should we do? But then they know we sort of live in Europe. We're a bit snobby. We have our own ways of doing things. So we look to like the next biggest thing, which I think right now is in the East. Potentially looking into China. That's why a lot of like politicians in Europe also like China very, very much because it's possibly the next big daddy. Um, and I think living in London, I see it a lot of time if I'm in the inner city of London. There's a lot of like backroom stuff happening with like the United Arabs and all of these countries. So I think there's a lot of stuff going on right now where people know the dollar's sort of weakening, but they haven't seen that fight yet or that clash. But I think normal citizens again over here, they just go like, oh, okay, you know, we're not importing gas out of Russia, so it's getting expensive now. These are the bad guys. China is an option. They may be helping us, but like America will save us. I think that narrative will stick for a very long time, but sort of will be the big boys fighting above everyone for the foreseeable future.
Like I say this, but I'm not surprised, but it is disappointing that, you know, it just confirms sort of in the same notion of what I said, that, you know, go outside of our circle, go outside of the Bitcoiner bubble that we all live in, and you start to realize like, oh, most people buy these media narratives. Most people just think like, you know, nothing is as bad as the doomsdayers, as I like to call myself, think it is. But there's a degree where we have to be cautious, and it's by the time, and this is sort of what I always say to my dad, because my dad is king of telling me like, you are in this echo chamber, like get outside of it and you will start to see that there are other things going on that are working that will keep this system alive for longer than you may want it to be around. You may be right that eventually you will be right, but I think he says, I think it'll be much longer for you than you realize. And I kind of agree with him, to be honest. People will call me bearish, but I'm more of a cautiously optimistic type of person.
I mean, just look at certain events happening in Europe, especially for what were that, like 35 years ish, I would say. Like you had like the Berlin Wall falling down and sort of all of these inner European fights, but every country had its own currency, every country sort of had its own economic advantages, disadvantages. Then they built up the European Economic Zone, which made sense. You know, let's open up the borders in a sense that we don't need every agreement back and forth. And then suddenly, like, hey, we're doing this like one currency thing. Like we came up with the euro because we're European, and either you get on board or you don't. And I think that happened more or less in like a couple of years. And that's how quickly Europeans adopted. So for us Bitcoiners to think that even though Bitcoin is amazing and it has all of the advantages, you can't expect normies to like come in and immediately change just because a couple of points make sense or because a couple of people do, which is why we need nation state adoption in Bitcoin, right? You need these examples to tell people, yo, dude, like they did it, it worked. We can see if we can try it as well. But I think it's very, very arrogant from our end to think that just because people might see Lightning in action without fees of third parties, or because you can store your own money, that everything is getting on board. Because I think we do have to remember, a lot of people actually don't want this. Like, they want a service where they can go to and say, hey, I have, I don't know, 10 grand in pounds. Can you convert this to dollar for me? Because I need to send this. And oh yeah, I'm giving you all of my savings because I'm sure you're doing a good job with them. A lot of people like this. They don't want to be self-custodying. They don't want to have power over their own finances, because it's sort of, again, that financial illiteracy where they go, oh shit, I haven't actually never learned it, or I don't have a clue what I should do in the next 30 years. So I think as Bitcoiners, we often have to keep reminding ourselves that, like, okay, maybe you need to go to the same coffee shop 10 times to show them how awesome Lightning is. They'll get it at one point, but they'll definitely never implement it right away. Because, like, come on, let's be honest. That would be the same as if all of those Euro representatives in the 90s would have come to every European country going like, hey, here's the Euro, accept it. And they went off right away. It also took its time. So I think it will take even longer with Bitcoin. Because it's technology. It's not just money. It can be everything you want it to be, right?
No, absolutely. Like, there's a lot I want to unpack in that. Let's start on what I think is the easiest part of that conversation, which is this idea that, the average person does not want to self-custody their Bitcoin. Like, I'm not saying the average Bitcoiner. Average person wants, if we have to force a shift to a new global reserve currency, they want the easiest thing that looks as similar to what they have now. They want a bank account. They want a card that they can sort of load up with money, a la a savings or a checking account, and then maybe have a separate account as a savings account. So with that said, companies like Unchained Capital, excellent example of, you are creating a system where you are allowing people to feel as though there is not that much of a change from the current system. Like, I'm spacing on what the proper terminology is, but the fact that you could use a multi-sig, Jesus, all right. The fact that you could have multiple signatures access an account, but you don't need all of them, that's literally from a safety deposit box. Like, there are safety deposit boxes that are designed so that you need 2, but they'll give you 4 different keys. The bank will always hold one, and you can give the other 3 keys out to whoever you like. That is at its core, that is Unchained Capital. They have simply recreated that for Bitcoin. That is a product, in my opinion, that will excel in a hyper Bitcoinized world, because the average person does not want to self-custody. So there need to be more of these products. Now, like, I got into this conversation with Shinobi at one point, and I agree with his point of view that, and like, I am an 80-20 to the T. Like, that is a law of life. If you do not know what the 80-20 law is, like, there's a book about it. I don't remember what it's called because I didn't read it. I've read enough papers about this concept, but at its core, essentially, is that, and the easiest way I can explain this, Joel Kai, like, when you start your car, is it a push to start or is it a key?
Neither. I don't drive, but it would be a push.
Regardless. So, all right. But like, when you push to start the car, do you know fully what is happening in the engine to start the car?
No,
or do you
of course
just
not.
you just trust that it works? Or when you flip on the light switch, like, I naively, like, I don't know these things anymore. I used to when I was a kid, but now, like, I flip on the light switch right here. It's like, okay, the light's on, but I don't know the mechanics behind it. And that's most people. That's the 80% of the user base. There's the 20% though, who can sit there and be like, oh yeah, the engine gets kickstarted with this, it then triggers this, and then now it starts rotating, and now it's like started. For anyone who actually knows how an engine runs, dunk on me, make fun of me for that, because I know how stupid that sounded. And on that notion, though, I think Bitcoiners, and especially those who are building products, need to understand that while it's easy to make a product right now for Bitcoiners who, in my opinion, all of these Bitcoiners who are right now in our space, like in this area, we are the 20%. And it's on us to really learn and understand these systems and these processes well enough so that when hyper-Bitcoinization happens, that other 80% can be onboarded so easily and so simply that they don't feel like it's a drastic shift. And in my opinion, if you disagree with that, you are going to be part of the problem that causes hyper-Bitcoinization to take longer than it should. Because if there are easier options with less friction, people are just simple and they will opt for the easier option 10 times out of 10.
And I guess I see it a lot with merchants. So there are more like coffee shops and restaurants popping out in and around London that accept Bitcoin. But if I speak to them, obviously not, they're going to tell me like, oh, I take Bitcoin because it's ungovernable. It has a it is a capped resource at the end of the day. There will never be one, allegedly never be one in 21 million. I should say it like this. You never know. But they're using it as maybe a payment provider because they can bypass 3.5 or 3.6% fees with MasterCard. If I tell them like, hey, there's this service which like it doesn't cost a lot, maybe slightly some fees are involved. And you can actually set it up with like this payment provider called IBEX, for example, that auto converts it into fiat. Like if you don't want to hold it in Bitcoin, you don't need to. You can take it out in fiat, but at least you save the transaction fees, right? If I speak with normies this way, they go like, oh shit, this actually makes sense. And they've not touched like economics, they've not touched all of the benefits that Bitcoin bring, but they've seen a real life example. Others, gold bucks, for example, and I can tell them, all you need are 12 to 24 words in your head for your private key. You can go wherever you want. You don't need to worry to like where to put your gold or your digital gold. That's a big advantage too. And I think it's taking where people are at currently to get the Bitcoin message across, because there's so much stuff involved. We haven't touched the energy thing. We haven't touched possible alternative for remittances internationally. So like all of these things are still in the room, right? But you have to start somewhere where people are like, oh, so there is a use case, it makes sense. And if they want go down more, great. And if not, then solutions like not multi-chain. Now I forgot the word. On-chain, sorry. Are there for you. Your multi-sig comment got me out of whack. And they're great as well. Like sometimes I really don't get the hate within the community to go against one thing that might be a solution, and the other thing is sort of like, oh, people can learn and they will take their time. Most people won't. They would rather watch what's on TV than actually reading a book about, I don't know, economics.
No, absolutely. Do you want to go a little more political right now, or should we go over to Credit Suisse?
Oh, we can go over to Credit Suisse.
Okay, let's talk Credit Suisse, because as of this moment in time, UBS has been forced to acquire Credit Suisse for a fraction of its cost. Like they bought it below market value in a forced sale. I would love your thoughts as a you mentioned earlier that you're a Swiss citizen, you're half Swiss. Mm-hmm. So talk me through first from the perspective of, Swiss citizens, what is Credit Suisse viewed as within the country itself and then broadly around Europe prior to this incident?
So if I go into any city in Switzerland and I ask them, with which bank do you hold your money? The most reasonable response would be, fuck you, I don't tell you. But the normal people would tell you, I'm either with Credit Suisse or UBS, or sort of post 2000s, there was it's literally called Post Finance, which is like the post office that built a digital arm for payments and such. But like Credit Suisse is the main thing. It's an old bank. It has established itself with its foot. If you go into Zurich, Paradeplatz, you're like right in the middle, huge building there. UBS is on the other side of that building. So they're present. people use that bank for everyday purchases, their mortgages, kids' savings accounts, uni accounts, and all these things. So it was an essential tool for the Swiss economy. And I'm really saying was because the bank failed at the end of the day. They can talk smack and try to bend the narrative as much as they want. They failed. They had to be bailed out. So I think for the normal Swiss citizen, it was like a huge shock in a sense, like, oh shit, this old institution that's worked for years, because same thing, right? Swiss franc, it is categorized as a strong currency. I can take my money in, I can take it out, and now they sort of over leveraged it. Okay, fine. UBS, on the other hand, they were bailed out in '08, so they had that bad rep, but they recovered well, looking back at it now. They had their moods, they had their ups and downs, but they, I think, were put together a bit better post bailout. So you have these two things in there. Internationally, from what I've seen, Credit Suisse is so intertwined in like all of the different markets that it really gets ugly fast. So that was possibly one of the main reasons. I have a few friends working at Credit Suisse. Some are in the Swiss branches, some in the international ones. And some of them basically told me like, dude, either we come into work today and we're going to fail, or like we continue going how it does. So like typical banker response are like, nice, good to know. But all of them were worried in the international context because they said, listen, at the end of the day, the Swiss government is going to be there to bail us out. They learned that in '08, but they were more worried about the international relationships they have established over possibly 50 years, going all the way through all of these different branches and such. So I think that is one of the main things, that it is a central thing in Europe. It was one of the older banks. It has established itself as sort of the bank for everyday citizens in Switzerland. So there was a security there. And I think because of that security locally in that country, worldwide or internationally, they could take on more risks, which just didn't pay out. They put down their chips on the wrong number or the wrong color, however you want to go about it, and they lost. I think that's a very, very dry, proper analysis of it all. What kind of implications this has, I don't know. You keep reading like with whom they've been working with. You also see these speculations with like Saudis pulled out in like exactly the right moment to like make the bank go down a slide, essentially. All of these things, but I think it's just down to they established themselves as secure in Switzerland, which many people still believe today, by the way, and they took on more risks than they should have. And they were always there with that backstop. Well, if shit works out, we go back to Switzerland, we're secure, we'll wait a few years and we'll build it up again. I think that was sort of the thing that unraveled in the past, 10 days probably, ever since the whole news came about.
It's funny because if you watched The Big Short, mm-hmm. Ryan Gosling's character is a banker with Credit Suisse, and mm-hmm. like they have been in the middle of all of these diabolical, and I say diabolical intentionally, sort of just the diabolical planning and systems that they have themselves created and situations that they have then put themselves in as a result. Like, I get, like, I understand both sides. I understand why the Saudi government was like, we can't keep giving you guys money. Like, no. And I also understand why the Swiss government had to come in and say, now, I'm not saying I agree with that decision. I am a free market capitalist. I believe that Credit Suisse, if it is going to fail, should fail. If a company wants to come in, a private company, or even a publicly traded company wants to come in on their own and say, we will buy up these assets at a distressed price, not with UBS getting a phone call from the Swiss government, go buy this, we'll give you the money, like just go do it. Like we need like that, no. But if UBS is just coming in and it's like, oh, we can just take all these accounts and we can be the bank in Switzerland, like why would we? Like I'm surprised not by what is happening, but by the public's response. And I brought this up to my brother. I want to stay on Europe and Credit Suisse, but I'm going to bring up the SVB just example. And I brought up the other day to him. I was like, you know how Biden got up there and said like, oh, taxpayers are not going to be footing the bill to bail out the depositors. Well, guess what? Here, I showed him that tweet that went around Twitter that showed that the Treasury printed $40 billion and then sent it over to the FDIC. And I was like, I don't give a shit what they say. They're never going to say it's a bailout again because they know how bad of a look it would look like if the Swiss government came and was like, we're bailing out Credit Suisse by telling UBS to buy them. Go.
It's actually crazy. I remember, these are sort of I think it's probably the same thing for people who were able to see the moon landing live, or the simulation, depending on which side of the aisle you're on. And I sat in front of the Federal Council press conference on that Sunday where they announced it. I remember, I think it went on for like 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours. And you had like the national press and obviously international press there. And they called it, I think, 42 times a commercial solution. So it's not a bailout. That was the main response from the Swiss government. And the government secures, essentially the government did a credit default swap on this deal working out. That's what it is at the end of the day. And, as for the tax-paying people, your money's safe, will not print more. And sort of all of the international journalists sat there asking themselves, like, what the fuck? Where does the 200 billion come from if you round everything up? Because there's always going to be more liquidity into these deals. And they sort of asked, so where's the money coming from? Well, we insured this with that and this with that. And you just do the math where you go like, it doesn't add up. You're still missing 125 billion, I think, at this point, which you have to create out of something. If you have like a hidden gold stack we've never known about, okay, maybe, I doubt it. And sort of it kept pushing that narrative onto a lot of people. But funnily enough, I asked friends in Switzerland, I asked relatives, like, have you seen the press conference? And all of them went, yes. I was like, it is bailout. And they were like, no, they didn't say it's a bailout because, like, UBS is offering to come on board. And like the Swiss government is securing it and all of these things are in place. I was like, you fucking idiots. I'm sorry. UBS, first of all, is not offering. They have to, as we've seen with the news coming out now, like they had to take the deal. Otherwise, they would have gotten in trouble. CS shareholders had no opportunity to cast their vote in. It was already decided on Wednesday, essentially, and they just waited until Sunday for the markets to close and not to spark more panic. And that was it. But to look at this and thinking how it cannot be a bailout, I don't know. But again, we're sort of looking at it with these Bitcoin eyes, where I think everyone has seen the credit default swap charts from CS from October last year. They sort of went on now, recovered a bit into Q4, but now they dropped, obviously leading up to the whole disaster. We all seen this again, but if you just look at this with people who possibly have their bank accounts there, they go by this saying like, okay, they told us it's safe. Even though we create a mega giant bank, like there were 2 big banks in Switzerland, now there's one with this merger or acquisition or whatever it was. And what if that one fails in 15 years? Is it then going to get nationalized and like you're literally at the whim of the government forever? Like, is that an option? So I find this fascinating that people, even though I think it's so clear, someone, whether that be a treasury, whether that be a national bank, whatever, has to print money to stimulate that loss, to get people in. How you can look at this and think like, oh, everything is bloomy, and yes, the bank failed, but they'll take up the slack. Maybe a few bankers will lose their jobs, which sort of, they're the bad guys anyway, right? They were part of that problem. But they don't realize that the initial problem is the system itself that just continues to bring out more and more of these catastrophes. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to get too deep down because then otherwise I'll start picking apart Swiss ideas and Swiss fundamentals. But it was funny to see. The conference is on YouTube. Everyone could look it up. There were some English passages. You can throw on subtitles in English. You can see the responses. You can clearly see that they were lying in certain parts. but it was good enough of a lie that people believe that, it's not a bailout, it is a commercial solution, and the bank will be fine, even though it will be the biggest bank to ever exist in Switzerland. And the next biggest danger for a possible systematic failure, because that's what was at stake. If they would have not saved them, that would have been lights out for Switzerland. And unfortunately, you don't read it too much in the mainstream media. But I think that's a different topic for a different discussion.
Yeah, I think ultimately the age-old adage of they've just been kicking the can down the road, and we are literally witnessing just another kick of the can. And
yeah,
I think, unfortunately, to wrap this part of the conversation up, they'll kick the can, and they may be successful in kicking it, but the distance they kick it is getting smaller and smaller. And we are getting very close to a point where they'll kick a can and it's not going to move anymore. We're getting much closer to that point. What will break first, we will see. But Joel, Kai, I want to now flip the script and talk a little bit about Down the Rabbit Hole. Talk to me a little bit about what you guys are cooking up there. I absolutely love my time joining you guys, the conversations and the questions you guys ask. It's a part of, I think, the Bitcoin journey that, again, it helps people who are just getting started understand that these people that you think like, oh, they know so much about Bitcoin, like, no. Anyone who says they know everything about Bitcoin, like, that's the biggest liar in the room. No real Bitcoiner will sit there and say like, oh, I know everything about Bitcoin. With the exception of maybe, honestly, I'll allow it if I ever get the opportunity to meet Andres Antonopoulos. Like, that might be the only person I would actually accept that, like, oh, you know more about Bitcoin than literally anyone else. Maybe, with the exception of Satoshi.
Yeah, I know one dickhead who claims, I'm not going there because you sit in the US, this could get us in trouble, but there are a few dickheads out there who claim this preposterous claim. So like, fuck them, because no one knows it all. And the idea behind the podcast is very simple. So we thought there are so many different communities, groups, opinions within Bitcoin, and there's not really a podcast featuring them, because I think even though we like to call ourselves very open and permissionless, I think there's sometimes a very heavy narrative going on in the Bitcoin landscape as well, which is normal if a group of people comes together and sort of claims ownership or part ownership of some of their stuff. And we want to sort of break free there, or at least allow people who might not fit that certain narrative to come in. I think one of the easiest narrative is, I think Bitcoin is quite America focused. A lot of the development goes on in America. A lot of like the conferences, the companies pushing it forward goes on there. So there is always a small bias towards that. So we want to feature like, people in Europe, people in Africa. We want to be a bit more open there. We're also trying to get people on from Asia and just telling their stories and why they got into, because it's fascinating to see. Most of them had a hardship as a moment of understanding Bitcoin. Maybe they weren't able to pay their dad in Africa. Maybe, the local government cut half of their savings because, like, why not? So all of these things sort of are the initial moment where they get Bitcoin, but what they do afterwards is quite unique. Some go completely against the main like Bitcoin narratives, I'm bringing up a very simple example, like not meat eating, sort of not like you said before, right-wing nutters. That's sort of the perception we have in the mainstream media. We interviewed people who go 180 degree in the complete different direction, but they're still a Bitcoiner. So we're interested to hear what their stories are. Because funnily enough, if you speak to everyone, at the end of the day, everyone agrees, like, we've got this thing called Bitcoin. It is going to change the future, and it's up to us to do with it whatever we please. That's sort of the main idea behind it. And obviously being UK based, we also want to stir up the pot a bit over here, because there's a lot of underground stuff going on in the UK. So a lot of like meetups happening, a lot of local events, but they never speak about these things. So we want to sort of be the voice of reason to go up there and say, hey, if you have something to say, like, you're more than welcome. We want to feature this. And who knows, maybe someone will be listening who hasn't discovered that group yet, but lives very closely. Those are sort of the 3 pillars of the top podcast. And I mean, the 4th, we get to talk to Bitcoiners, which is always amazing. So that's a good way. That's a good way to have or fit everything together.
Love that. And where can people stay up to date on the latest episodes and stay up to date with everything you've got cooking up?
Podcast player of your choice. Just look for Rabbit Hole Stories. It should pop up very briefly. I can also send the link if you want to put it into the comments or whatever. I think it's rabbitholestories.co. That'll be the domain. That's the website. And from there on, you get to the YouTube, to the socials, and all the episodes we put out there. They go out on Monday, 6 a.m. London time. And we've been on a streak of like 13 weeks, I think, now. So we're getting there. We're getting the consistency in, which is nice to see.
Love that, man. Ladies and gentlemen, that will do it for another episode of Late Night Bitcoin. I'm going to go smoke some weed, and you should do the same. Good night. We'll be back tomorrow.